Hello and welcome to another episode of The Voice for American Law Enforcement. I'm your host, Randy Sutton, a 34-year police veteran of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. I am the author of A Cop's Life and the founder of The Wounded Blue, the National Assistance and Support Organization for injured and disabled law enforcement officers. And I want to welcome you to another episode of our show. If you are watching this on YouTube or you are listening to it on the radio or on AmericaOutloud.com, I appreciate you taking the time to join us. I have a special co-host with me today. Jason Harney is with me. Jason is a retired police sergeant and also a filmmaker. He is got a really interesting perspective on law enforcement. We're going to get into that shortly. But first, I'm going to give you my view from the blue. So I want to talk about what I call Trojan horse district attorneys and prosecutors. And the reason that I'm bringing this topic up is because in New York City, a brand new radical district attorney has been voted into office in Manhattan. And his name is Bragg. And within days of his coming onto the job, he has issued basically a proclamation that he is not going to prosecute basically anybody for anything. When I say this, I'm not really even being facetious. He has announced that among other things, he is going to prosecute armed robberies as petty larcenies. You heard me correctly. In his view, if I come up and I point a gun at you and you give me everything that's in your pocket, $85 or $100, and I don't shoot you, well, that's just a petty larceny. And that is actually, he announced this. It is absolutely outrageous. He's not going to prosecute for a number of other crimes: drugs, prostitution, resisting arrest. Now, I bring this up because Bragg is just one of a legion of district attorneys and prosecutors who have been put into office by the millions of dollars of funding provided by an individual named George Soros. Soros, through a complete landscape of nonprofits and organizations, has been funding these district attorneys and prosecutors races for a number of years now. And the insidious nature of this is something that needs to be known to the public. And that's why I'm talking about it. Now, what does a Trojan horse district attorney mean? Well, it means that individual who is an enemy of public safety, make no bones about it, an enemy of public safety, has been let into the gates by the voters. The voters have put these men and women into office. And these same people who have voted to put these men and women into office are the same people who are going to be victimized. We all know that violent crime is surging across this country. It's at record levels. Homicides are at record levels in America's cities. The armed robberies, sexual assaults, and other violent crimes are seeing record numbers. And at the same time, we're seeing a lack of prosecution in these same cities. It's irrational. It makes no sense. But what it reveals is that there is a movement afoot, a movement to undermine the very criminal justice system that is put into place to keep Americans safe. And that movement is being funded by people like George Soros, but mostly by him. He's a 91-year-old multi-billionaire who you wonder what his end game is. So we have Chesa Boudin in San Francisco, the son of two murdering terrorists who one is still in prison for killing police officers and other people, who is as radical as they come. We have George Gascon in Los Angeles, who is where the body count is just piling up, and now we have Bragg. So you have a radical district attorney in place in some of the most the largest American cities, and they make no bones about it. They just simply don't want to prosecute for criminal activity. Now, there at least is a movement that is now taking place in Los Angeles and in San Francisco to recall those two district attorneys. I don't know if it'll be successful. I hope it will be, because they are dangerous to the public safety. And America needs to wake up, because the Trojan horse may be coming to a city near you. And that's my view from the blue. Let's bring Jason in to get into this topic. Jason, you spent a lot of years as a cop, and you've been watching this both in your role as law enforcement a supporter, but also as someone who stays relevant by producing films that are related to law enforcement. Sure. What do you think? I mean, you've been watching this. What do you think is behind this?
Well, it's an interesting, topic to discuss. I mean, I think that ultimately it comes down to a couple things. Platforms. The mainstream media controls the narrative. What I've noticed certainly is that regardless of what flavor of news that, each individual person in this country watches, they are going to see a talking head who's going to deem themselves an expert in anything. So when we get to the police matters that we talk about frequently, obviously that means that these people are going to listen and then ultimately probably vote for the district attorneys and every level of government who is going to create the types of policies that they have been conditioned to believe are going to work. But they're well funded, as you already pointed out. Big tech supports them. I mean, we have a problem right now where there are certain social media platforms that are deplatforming certain politicians that they don't agree with, which to me puts them at a tremendous and obvious disadvantage come election time. Right. And then you have the mainstream media that pushes these narratives. And what's really interesting, and we all know this, is whenever you have a particular topic or issue, what do we see? If it does not fit that narrative, then you're not going to see it on that particular channel. So what you were just discussing in the issue with Bragg in New York City, and the change in law and the way an armed robbery is actually viewed by them in terms of prosecutional merit. If you point a gun at somebody, say you're doing an armed robbery of a liquor store, and as long as you don't pull the trigger and fire that round, right. Apparently it's not an armed robbery, it's just a larceny for the liquor and or cash that you took. Well, that's obviously a big problem. And how do we get to that point? Well, you're not going to see that discussion on certain news channels. But the problem is a large part of the country watches those news channels, takes it as if it's the gospel, takes it as if it's fact, and then that puts us where we're at, because there was a tremendous get out to vote drive in the last presidential election. You have to say it was successful. You had millions of people vote that probably had never voted in a presidential election before. And then that went on down the ballot, though. So what do we have now? We have these people all the way down to the district attorney's office, as you said, that are in place and ultimately making these policies that are making our country sick.
One of the things I find interesting, and I don't think it's accidental, is that the defund the police movement, the anti-law enforcement movement that has been basically hamstringing law enforcement for a number of years now, seems to have been correlating with this the advent of this district attorney movement to get these people into office. So I'm not a believer in coincidences. You push to defund the police, to dehumanize the police, to create laws that literally don't allow the police to police. And at the same time that this is happening, you're seeing what inevitably is going to be the result of that, which is the surging crime, violent crime. I mean, you can't pick up a newspaper where you don't see a story about some horrendous figure that denotes the number of bodies piling up in America's cities. And at the same time, now you have prosecutors being put into place, literally. I mean, in the most violent cities in America, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, where they refuse to prosecute or they diminish the prosecution. What is the inevitability that we're going to see from this?
Well, I think we're already seeing it, and you touched on it a little bit earlier. We have a rising homicide rate in nearly every major city in this country. When you hamstring the police, what ends up happening, of course, and we talk about this all the time, is proactive policing stops. Because, your average police officer is going to be out there working the street regardless of where they're at in their career. It could be, a year on, 5 years on, 10 years on. It doesn't really matter. They're going to come to the quick realization that if they're not supported by their chain of command and by the people making the policies they're required to follow, or if they're going to make an arrest and they're going to be scrutinized for it, and then see the district attorney not prosecute a good crime where the case does have merit, but they don't prosecute it anyway because of political motivations, then what do cops tend to not do? They don't go into the high crime areas. They don't make those person and vehicle stops because I think to them it's just not worth it. And I think that's the byproduct of what we see happening now.
I think you're absolutely right. So what we're seeing police officers afraid to police.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I, of course, in my capacity as a law enforcement commentator on the news, and also in my capacity as part of the Wounded Blue, which deals with injured and disabled officers across the nation, I hear these stories. I hear the pain that these officers are in, because you and I both know that most people become a police officer because of a calling.
Sure.
They really want to play a role in being a protector. Well, when the protectors can't protect themselves, then the public goes, well, wait a minute. If they can't protect themselves, how are they going to protect me? Mm-hmm. And this undermines the fabric of our republic.
It really does.
And inevitably, but here's where I scratch my head. New York City, their crime rate has just blossomed, right? Like a flowers all over the fields. It's nice. I think that's kind of a cool.
I'm sure that's why they look at it, right?
So the bloodbath is real. We're seeing the homicide rates, the armed robbery rates, just climbing and climbing. The smash and grabs, the what I call mass criminal events taking place, and so just this month, January, the new mayor, who was elected on the platform of restoring some fight against crime, he was elected on that platform. He's a retired police captain.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, a guy who gets Bragg gets elected as the district attorney in the same city, who is, and he didn't lie about it. He said, I'm not going to prosecute these people. So how do you look at those two events and come to terms with how in God's name did that happen? It's literally the system can't work. Mm-hmm. with those two dichotomies in play.
Well, I think people, again, they're fed by the mainstream media and by a curated feed in their respective social media platforms that's telling them what they should be thinking and what they should be voting for. And that's how that kind of thing happens. You know how some of the late night talk show hosts, they used to go out into the street, literally during their broadcast.
Yeah.
They'd ask people some common questions about who their state leaders are, who their federal leaders
Right.
are, even who the vice president of the United States is, and they couldn't answer those questions. Well, it's the same thing here. I mean, people have lives. I don't ever believe that, the majority of people, the majority of voters, I should say, actually go into the voting booth with a full understanding of everybody they're voting for and why. You might see that in a presidential election at the top of the ballot, but as you go down ballot, and that's kind of the idea of this conversation, is how important those down ballot races really are. You'd think a district attorney would be elected, and regardless of whether it's a partisan race or not, they would do their job. But we're not seeing that.
But you see, and isn't but it's a brilliant strategy on the part of the left.
Absolutely.
It's a brilliant strategy. When I first saw this taking place a number of years ago, and I watched with great interest how this election was manipulated by literally millions of dollars being poured into, which was, and it was in I forget which city it was in. It was a medium-sized city, and I saw this happening. I'm going, wow, that's pretty interesting. And George Soros's name popped up, of course. As a major contributor to this, and he has been so successful in this insidious intrusion into the criminal justice system that he's empowered in a major way. Yeah. But we also see the results of this in real time now as we watch the crime rates soar. And at the same time, many of these prosecutors instead of prosecuting criminals, are going after police officers in a major way. They want to prosecute the police. They don't want to prosecute the predators, but they want to prosecute the police. There was a big win that I want to talk about here, and I was very involved in this situation. Just a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, a police officer from La Mesa, California, Matthew Dagas, was found not guilty by a jury on all charges. And the charges resulted from an incident that took place in his city. He was assigned to a trolley station. And the reason he was assigned there was because there were people that were, not paying the fares. And so he was assigned to basically provide security at this trolley station. So he sees an individual that he believes doesn't belong there, begins a conversation with him. Dagas is white. This individual was black. And of course, there was somebody with a cell phone that was filming the encounter. At some point during the consensual encounter, the suspect got up and basically bladed his body and this is where we're going to talk about your film that's coming up.
Sure.
In a stance that Officer Dagas realized was combative, and then he got in and actually pushed him. The suspect pushed Dagas. Dagas literally pushed him down into a sitting position, and that's what was filmed. So Dagas eventually arrested him for resisting and disorderly. And that little piece of video, which was simply a movement to get him away from him, went viral. And that night, the social media platforms brought basically a riot into the city of La Mesa. La Mesa burned. La Mesa burned, and the police department was told to stand down. And it's the city still hasn't recovered, and this is over 2 years ago. But as a result of that, there was this huge, notoriety about this officer, and he was investigated by the Internal Affairs, by the Use of Force Board. He was exonerated, that they said the use of force was proper and legal. But here's what happened, and this is absolutely stunning. This is what we talk about when we talk about depolicing and the movement against law enforcement. So the city government did not like that he was found to have been righteous in his use of force. So what they did next is absolutely almost impossible to believe. They went to him, the city manager, went to him and said, look, we think that you need to find another home. We want you to resign. And we'll give you, get this, they offered him $600,000 to resign. But Matthew Dagas is a man of principle. And he told them, I did nothing wrong. I'm not resigning. I'm not going to take your money. And what they did next is absolutely stunning. The city government went out and hired an outside firm to reinvestigate. And of course, when they reinvestigated, they said that Matthew Dagas was used force inappropriately and had lied on his police report. So they fired him, and then they went to the San Diego district attorney and had her prosecute him on the felony charges of falsifying a police report. Matthew Dagas' life was upended. His wife and he began the fight of their life. And I had the opportunity to be with him and his wife on several occasions where they were advising me of what was taking place. And I was bringing this situation to the people who listen to this show. Well, he fought him and he won. And now the city is going to face the consequences for persecution by prosecution. But don't you think, Jason, that this is being watched by every cop in America?
Oh, there's no question about it. And, I think that Americans need to understand one really important thing, and that is if you're going to expect the police to police and to go out and proactively stop criminals from committing crimes or catch the ones who've already committed them, you are inevitably going to run into violent suspects who are not going to allow you to put handcuffs on them and take them to jail. It's that simple. Some people, most people, actually will comply. But there's a percentage that will not, particularly if you have somebody who has a lot to lose, such as a violent felon who knows that if they get prosecuted one more time, they're going back to prison. If you box them in, that suddenly nonviolent criminal becomes violent in the blink of an eye, as we say. So Americans need to understand that. That's always been our job. But with the advent of cell phone cameras and some of the political things that we've talked about, all of a sudden now, everybody thinks they know what it's like to walk in our shoes. Everybody believes that they know what the right solution would be to any given situation. And what are they measuring that on? 2 or 3 seconds of video. We saw that in the Columbus, Ohio shooting last year, where we had a specific sports star who has a platform of millions of followers on every social media platform immediately doxed that police officer, saying, "You're next." Well, what did that supposedly very smart basketball player base that upon? A few seconds of video. Nobody knows what the call was. Nobody knows what the officers knew when they arrived. Nobody even saw what led up to that and the fact that that officer saved a young woman's life. But is that the narrative that we see? It's not. Americans need to start to grapple with that idea. I don't know that if a certain part of the population ever has. I think the majority always has. But I think that majority is starting to crumble a little bit because we've all taken sides in this supposed political divide that we're in this country. And unfortunately, that means that people are going to not do their homework and they're not going to understand the complexities of the job a cop sees every single day on every call.
And this is a perfect segue for to talk about your new film. First of all, you're during your law enforcement career, you were a trainer, and you spent a lot of years training police officers in defense tactics.
Yes.
Now you have morphed into the creative world. You created the film The Wounded Blue, yes, which I urge everybody that is listening or watching the show to go to Amazon.com or some of the other platforms and watch this film. This documentary film, The Wounded Blue, documents what is truly happening to law enforcement officers when they are severely injured or disabled in the line of duty. It will shock you. And I hope that it does shock you and move you to help an incredible organization like The Wounded Blue. But that was one of the films you've done. You've just completed another film that is really based on defense. If you would, let's talk about that film now.
Sure. Yeah, the film is going to be called Wrist Lock. I'm putting the finishing touches on it right now. It's going to essentially cover or chronicle the martial arts influence on police use of force. And we're tackling a lot of different issues in this film. Ultimately, I think that what we want people to understand is what I was just talking about, the complexities of the job. Each and every time you make that car person stop or go on a domestic dispute or a loud music call or any type of call that you could be dispatched to, big police departments have millions of these calls every single year. I want people to understand what is going through a police officer's mind each and every time they arrive on that call, what's going to ultimately make them feel as though they are in control of the situation, and what the little bells and whistles are that might be going off in their mind that maybe something is amiss or something's not going to go the way they believe, and then ultimately how do they handle it. So we want to cover the full spectrum of use of force, but a little known fact, probably to the general public, is that every defensive tactics technique that a police officer is taught, and this is across all 18,000 plus police agencies in this country, is derived from martial arts. But what do we think about when we think about your average martial artist? How did they become so proficient and so good at what they do? Well, practice. What is it as police officers that we know that police officers do not like to do when it comes to training? They don't like to practice. But even probably more of a problem is that agencies don't mandate it either. And unfortunately, there are places in this country, more than we will ever know, that once you graduate the police academy, you will never have to take a physical fitness test again. You will never have to practice defensive tactics again, which could include something as important that you'll use every day, like handcuffing. And as we've discussed in films like The Wounded Blue, and you've made it your life's mission to try to remedy the mental side of things. If a police officer is mentally compromised from cumulative trauma in some manner throughout his or her career, you have to assume that their use of force decision making is also going to be compromised at some level. And what we typically see as trainers is either a classic overreaction or an underreaction.
You know, this is fascinating material, and I think the fact that your entire career has been not just in the basic law enforcement, but in the training aspect of this. So I know you feel very passionately about this, but what I find really interesting is you melding your creative being into this world, and it's a really interesting, for me, a very interesting topic to talk to you about, because you're basically translating for the public what is a very little known aspect about law enforcement, and yet it is probably the most important and most misunderstood aspect of law enforcement is the use of force. So you sought out some incredible people to be in this film. Talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, the film is framed around a really good friend of mine, a guy that when I came out of the police academy in the early 1990s and was assigned to my first graveyard squad, I met a fellow officer named John Gentile. Well, he is a master martial artist and has been in training in the martial arts for over 4 decades. And because I trained under him myself and have known him and has been a very good friend of mine since then, I sought him out as basically the primary subject of the film because I wanted somebody that had that, he's a retired police sergeant now. He retired 26 years from our agency. But I wanted someone who was well-rounded in the martial arts, but also could speak on the police side of things and could take the audience through a journey, if you will, into all over the country and see all of the different martial arts that influenced police use of force, and then where do we go from there? How do we get the fitness angle addressed? Why are agencies not doing that, but what are the solutions? And I'm not talking about necessarily the idea, I mean, sure, we could probably put on film or on screen a lot of overweight cops, but that's not really what it's about. It's not a vanity situation or how good somebody looks. It's your health. Right? I mean, that's ultimately what we're looking at. A harrowing statistic that Dr. John Scheinberg, who appears in the film as one of the medical experts, he travels the country with a message that primarily revolves around the fact that the average civilian lives to be 79 years old, but the average cop only lives to be 57 years old. That's a 22-year disparity.
Wow.
And is far and away the largest of any occupation in this country. Why? Well, it's a cocktail of terrible things all kind of culminating at once. We know stress, okay? The lack of physical fitness, of course. And then everything that comes into play mentally when we talk about some of the things that are going on in this country. It's very debilitating to a cop's ability to do the job. When you're seeing all this noise on the news, we're not like professional athletes and you can just block out the crowd and mentally focus. That's very difficult to do when everybody from your own chain of command to all of the politicians in your particular city are going on the news every single day not supporting you. So that's what we seek to do with this film, is to talk about those issues. And, you were talking about putting that whole creative force towards this particular topic and some of the others that we've done, like the Wounded Blue. Here's the way I look at it, and I just talked about this in a LinkedIn post just a couple days ago. The truth is ours to tell because we lived it. It's not somebody else's, some talking head who just deemed the fact that because this is the hot button issue of the day that I have to get in front of a news camera and talk about it and act like I know it all, because they don't. They've never done our job. So it's time that people like the Randy Suttons of the world and so many like yourself that are out there telling what the truth is. But the question is, will people listen?
That is the question. I don't want the audience to think that you're a one-trick pony here, okay? Because one of the other films that you did was based on cheerleading.
It was, actually. I mean, I've done a few sports documentaries too. For me, it's really just the love of filmmaking, and those that know me certainly will understand that. But you're correct. My passion during my career here was defensive tactics, use of force, and I worked on our police academy for a number of years and in-service training throughout my career, training our own instructors for well over a decade. So yes, it is something that I was very passionate about, and really a lot of the film work I've done to me culminates with this, because you're always going to make mistakes and when you're putting these massive films together. They're feature films, and when you're kind of a one-man show and you're doing all the jobs from conception all the way to distribution, obviously there's a lot that goes into it and it takes a lot of time, and you're going to make a few mistakes. But I was hoping to learn from those and then ultimately make this film, and hope it is by far and away the most ambitious thing that I've ever done. But I'm very thankful for the cast and the people that donated their time to be in this film, because what I found was a lot of people when I pitched it who were smiling back at me. And why is that? Because we're talking about the same issues that they were talking about, regardless of we're talking about Fort Worth, Texas, Tucson, Arizona, Jacksonville, Florida. The message was always the same. Unfortunately, because certain administrators, they get to a certain level and they never ask the trainers, the people who are putting in the time to analyze this stuff and really understand what works and what doesn't.
And this is part of a much bigger discussion too.
Yeah.
This is part of the discussion that I have an upcoming book that is going to have some of this material in it, and that is that I think that we have missed a golden opportunity to evolve as a career in policing. When I say that, all right, there's been this massive disinformation campaign about reimagining policing, reforming policing is the word, police reform, and it's really been about revenge against the police, not been about reformation, because policing doesn't need reformation. Policing needs to be allowed to evolve and needs to be allowed to capitalize on all of the advancements that have taken place, but they're not. So here's what I really want your thoughts on this. If the political leadership of this country really wants policing to improve, all right, we are all believers in that. We are all believers in let's improve policing. But we could have taken all of this insanity, all of this effort to destroy policing, and instead of that, put in funding to train policing. Because isn't training the real crux of this issue here for how we could make our police better? Mm-hmm. And if we put the money and the time and the effort, all this that's been put into this movement to destroy law enforcement, we could have really made a change. And we could, and maybe a film like yours will be a wake-up call for police leadership. Let's make our cops better by training them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would kind of refer to that as just changing the culture. Reimagining is kind of the word that's thrown around by people who have never done our job. And they think they know what it is. They think they know what it's like. But we know that's not the case. So they have to say something in front of the TV cameras to maintain their relevancy. So they're just going to spout off all of these ideas that anyone who's done the job, including police leaders, know it's not going to make sense. It's not doable. But like anything in the world that is worthy, it takes money to be able to get these things done. And something we noticed, from moving about the country, filming The Wounded Blue, you and I, was that a lot of these smaller agencies do not have the infrastructure in place to plan for that day one of their cops is involved in a critical incident, and then ultimately, how do we take care of them in the aftermath? We know it's woefully substandard in that category. Well, it's the same thing with training as well. A lot of times, one of the guys, Anthony Brown in the film, he has a really good quote where he talks about how a department will go out and buy the latest drone, for example, and spend $1 million on it. And not to say it's not for a good reason, but that same department, you'll have a trainer say, hey, let's bring this guy in and pay him $2,500 to train our cops in this very specific and noteworthy skill. Oh no, we can't afford that. And so, right. Yeah, and the irony of the whole defund the police thing that we were all saying at the time, especially in 2020 when it kind of reached its peak, is, do people realize that the budgets for the actual cops on the street and the cars that they drive and the equipment that they have is not what's going to be slashed? It's the training budget.
Exactly.
Their training budget is going to be slashed to zero. And so years will go by. And again, our police officers across this country in agencies large and small are not going to have their skills honed. I mean, how would you like to have somebody like a doctor, for example, operate on you who hasn't had any recertification training in 10 years?
Exactly.
We have to look at policing in the same way. It is a profession, after all. It is a very complex job. There are tons of components to it that I think the average person just doesn't get.
I had a phone call that really shocked me. I did a little research after you'll remember that there was a tragic officer-involved shooting where a 13 or 14-year-old boy was playing with basically a toy gun and in a park. This was in Ohio, and someone saw what he thought was a gun and called the police, and the police responded. Now, when the police responded, there was an inexperienced officer driving the car, and when he pulled up to what was considered to be an armed suspect, he literally pulled directly up to that suspect, placing his partner in a position where when he saw the gun and the kid raised the gun, which turned out to be a toy, he opened fire and killed the child. And it was, it made just, it was a horrendous, horrible, tragic situation that devolved into protests and destroyed the life of that officer. Which was clearly a training issue from my point of view. So I contacted the state of Ohio, their Police Officer Standards and Training Commission, and I said, tell me about your training requirements. And their basic training requirements were like 400 and some hours. It was really, really low. And I said, well, what about your in-service training? And they said 2 hours a year.
Yeah.
And I said, wait a minute, hold on a second. 2 hours a year? That's insane. And this person who was on the other side of the conversation said, I know. And the state legislature actually enacted a law that said we have to train 8 hours a year. Oh boy, 8 hours, right? Or 12 hours, whatever it was. But then they refused to fund it.
Right.
So it's exactly what you just said, that led and is leading to these tragic situations where then the police are blamed and it inflames society. And it all comes down to the topic of your film. Where are you in the where the film is going to be released?
Well, we're in. I'm just finishing up post-production now. The film had been in production since early last summer, so we are hoping to have it probably released in the next couple months. It's a process, as you know. We're at the point to try to get some eyeballs on it and maybe scale it down a little bit. But I'm really liking where it's at, and I'm hoping to have something to show people pretty soon, because I think it will be impactful if we can get it out there. And that's always the trick, when you don't have a multi-million-dollar marketing machine behind you, like a lot of these entities that we've been talking about do. That's how you get a message out, and that's a really tough thing to do. And obviously, police-related films aren't necessarily the top of the food heap today when it comes to that topic, just because obviously there's a narrative out there that is anti-police, which is really sad because as we both know, there are just so many dedicated cops out there across this country who do the job for certainly not anything that would be construed as life-changing money. And yet they do it for the right reasons, and they get the job done with less every single day, with virtually no support from the people that matter in how things go for their job.
Now, I know you have a social media presence. How can people tune into you and know more about you and about the film?
Generally speaking, I'm on Twitter at Jason Harney 72 is the how you'll find me there, and then LinkedIn, you can find me by name as well, and then Lightning Digital Entertainment is my company, and lightningdigitalentertainment.com is the website. So yeah, obviously my idea is to continue the filmmaking career and make as many films that are impactful as possible. I do like to cover a wide variety of subjects, but given my my background, the career that I hold near and dear and retired from, thankfully in one piece, I'm always going to try to give back and try to tell the stories of police officers that, at least from my view, would go untold otherwise. And that's what we did with the Wounded Blue. Those are stories that didn't get a lot of media attention, maybe locally, but certainly not nationally. And that's really what this film is about, too, to bring the attention to a topic that, the mainstream media just simply refuses to cover.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to come in and co-host the show with me today, Jason.
Yeah, it was a blast. Thank you, Randy.
No, my pleasure. So, a couple things before we end the show. Each show, you'll if you've been listening or watching for a while, I end the show with, basically eulogizing law enforcement officers who have died in the line of duty. And since January has taken place, we've lost two. The first is police officer Christopher Gibson, Dallas Police Department, Texas. Police officer Chris Gibson died from complications as a result of contracting COVID-19 in the line of duty. Officer Gibson served with the Dallas Police Department for over 24 years. He is survived by his wife and two daughters. So Police Officer Christopher Gibson, Dallas Police Department, Texas. End of watch Sunday, January 2nd, 2022. The next is North Carolina Trooper John Horton. John Horton was killed in the line of duty in a very, very tragic accident. He had requested backup on a motor vehicle stop where he had an individual detained. His backup arrived in the person of his brother, who was also a North Carolina state trooper, who lost control of the vehicle and struck both his brother and the detainee, both killed. John Horton, North Carolina Department of Public Safety, State Police. End of watch, January 6th, 2022. Both of these individuals gave their lives in the line of duty. So one thing before we say goodbye is I want to once again bring to your attention the Wounded Blue. The Wounded Blue is the National Assistance and Support Organization for injured and disabled law enforcement officers. This organization has helped more than 13,000 American law enforcement officers who were severely injured, either mentally, emotionally, psychologically, or physically. Their stories are incredible, and I urge you to watch the film that Jason and I talked about that he created called The Wounded Blue. It's on Amazon.com and other platforms. You can find it. This organization is made up of individual officers who have suffered. They are the peer advocate support team of the Wounded Blue, and each one of these officers, despite the physical and emotional injuries they have received, want to continue to serve. Well, that's a really important topic here, and that is the service that they want to continue to do. And that is, they may not be able to perform as a police officer anymore. So they continue to want to serve their brothers and sisters, and they do so in very, very dramatic ways. We have saved a number of lives. I ask you to go to our website, thewoundedblue.org. That's thewoundedblue.org, and check out who we are, what we do. If you can donate, we would really appreciate it. If you like this cool mug and the one Jason has, you can, and my cool t-shirt, by the way. I need to get you a t-shirt. You can get them on our website as well. That's thewoundedblue.org. And we have some pretty cool gear. There's going to be some more information coming out about some topics that I think you will enjoy. If you're a Facebooker, you can find The Wounded Blue on Facebook. And if you want to connect with me, the Voice of American Law Enforcement, the Voice for American Law Enforcement, is also on Facebook. I love to hear from people who watch the show and listen to the show, and I'd love to hear your suggestions. If there's guests that you want me to bring on, please let me know. I'll reach out to them. So once again, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us here at the Voice for American Law Enforcement. I'm Lieutenant Randy Sutton, and my co-host, Sergeant Jason Harney. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.